were at the point in the last episode of this talking about the Declaration of Rights. We said James had fled the country and William of Orange had come over to marry Mary, and both of them didn't want to rule on their own. So they ruled as joint sovereigns because Mary said she would not be over her husband, and William said he would not be a servant of his wife. I think Mary was a Stuart as well, actually. Yes, she was. So, being in Scotland with the Stuarts, it's interesting. So William landed at Torbay with an army much smaller than that commanded by the king. When James saw his army deserting in droves, he sent his wife and son to France and then followed them a short while after. King James II. William was asked to take on the administration of the country. However, William despised the English and replaced a number of our senior military and civil servants with Dutchmen. The politicians, thinking they'd got rid of one bad king and it looked like they were about to get another, went and spoke to the aldermen and 50 of the Common Council of the City of London. William, hearing of this, issued instructions for writs to be sent to every borough in England. The boroughs were to send representatives to Westminster to tell the politicians and William how we, the English, wish to be ruled. The representatives came to Westminster and met the lords, the politicians and aldermen and Common Council of the City of London at a convention. We're talking about the Declaration of Rights. It was not a parliament because only a king or queen may call a parliament. King James II was in France and had no desire to call a parliament. After much discussion, they produced the Declaration of Rights, which was a further restatement of Alfred's laws. The Declaration was shown to William and Mary, who were told by the representatives of the people that if they wanted the crown, they had to accept the terms of the Declaration of Rights, and these were the minimum rights and freedoms the people would tolerate. William and Mary accepted the crown under these terms. Now he was king, William called a parliament. William did not have an election, but instead said the people's representatives would be his parliament. The first thing Parliament did was to pass the Declaration of Rights into law as the Bill of Rights, 1689. 2 codicils were added to the bill. First, any amendments after the 23rd of December 1689 were void and not lawful, and second, that this bill was for all time. So we're on the Bill of Rights. Now it is a convention that no parliament can bind another. So how could this parliament bind every successive parliament forever? The answer is simple. This parliament was made up of the people's representatives. The will of the people is supreme over both parliament and the sovereign. Until such time as the representatives of the people meet and change the 1689 Bill of Rights, this bill remains the law. In 1695, in order to avoid the fate of those who had deposed Charles I, the people who had deposed James II passed the 1695 Treason Act, placing a 3 years time limit on bringing a prosecution for treason some 6 years after they deposed James II. The 1695 Treason Act is ultra-virus because it grants a partial dispensation from the penalty of your crime, the treason, because we all suffer if treason occurs and is successful. We all have a right and a duty to prosecute treason. In his commentaries on the laws of England, Chief Justice Blackstone in 1765 said that he was writing about the laws of Alfred. This makes it clear that Alfred's laws were still in place during the life of Chief Justice Blackstone. Since the time of King Alfred, our law has developed for over 1,000 years. It was developed by our forefathers because from time to time bad or frankly useless kings have needed to have their ways corrected. Kings who would not listen were removed, as mentioned above. Edward II was such a king and was removed in favour of his son. He was subsequently killed at Berkeley Castle in Gloucestershire. Charles I had his head removed for treason against the people, as did his Lord Strafford. James II was forced to flee to France. Each and every time a king has been removed or had his ways changed, the reason has been because he's tried to rule outside of the law, Alfred's laws of England, treason and sedition. We have dealt with English constitutional law as it is written. The law does indeed give us protection from despotic government. Our forefathers, however, did not just trust the law, they built into our system of government extra safeguards, particularly in the way Parliament itself is required to work. Parliament consists of three parts: the Commons, the Lords, spiritual and temporal, and the Sovereign over all three parts. Individually, none of these parts can make or repeal law. Our forefathers foresaw that if any one part was able to claim supremacy in the system, we would suffer from oppressive government. Parliament works by the Commons originating legislation, which is then passed to the Lords for scrutiny. It is the function of the Lords to amend or refuse the legislation if they believe it to be oppressive or in any other way not good legislation. If the Lords approve the legislation, it then goes before the Sovereign, who may refuse the royal assent if he or she considers the legislation not to be in the best interests of their subjects. Any attempt to subvert the make-up of Parliament is the major crime of sedition, and at this level sedition is high treason. Any attempt to damage the Sovereign's powers or authority is high treason. So then, we've covered that. The next is the Finance Bill 1909 and the Parliament Act of 1911. I'm guessing it's probably going to lead on to saying that that is treason. Thank you for tuning in. We're moving on up north. We're going to continue to hand out cards and leaflets before we leave town. I hope you've enjoyed this video and were able to hear over the cars driving past.